Hi everyone, and welcome back to the podcast. My name is Anna. Today I have a new story for you, called The Workshop. It's about a man who rediscovers an old dream later in life, and learns that it's never too late to build something meaningful with your own two hands. As always, just relax and listen, and let's begin. Robert Hayes was 58 years old, approaching retirement after 32 years working as an accountant for the same insurance company. As his retirement date grew closer, Robert felt an unexpected mixture of relief and anxiety, uncertain how he would fill the countless hours previously occupied by his demanding career. During his final months at work, Robert found himself reminiscing frequently about his younger years, particularly memories of his own father's small workshop, where Robert had spent countless childhood afternoons watching his father skillfully craft furniture from raw lumber. Robert could still vividly recall the smell of fresh sawdust filling his father's garage, the rhythmic sound of hand saws cutting through wood, and his father's patient, focused expression while carefully sanding a nearly finished piece. His father had built most of the furniture throughout Robert's childhood home, the kitchen table where the family ate every meal, the bookshelves lining the living room walls, even Robert's own childhood bed frame, sturdy enough that Robert's own children had later used the very same bed during their visits to their grandparents. Robert had always admired this ability, secretly wishing he had pursued something similar himself, rather than the stable, predictable accounting career he eventually chose instead. His father had passed away almost 15 years earlier, and Robert sometimes wondered, with quiet regret, whether he should have asked more questions, learned more directly from his father while he still had the opportunity. "I always meant to learn woodworking properly someday," Robert admitted to his wife, Linda, one evening a few weeks before his official retirement date. "I don't know why I never actually did it." "There's still time," Linda said encouragingly. "You're not exactly ancient, Robert. Why not start now?" Robert considered this seriously over the following weeks, eventually researching local woodworking classes and discovering a community workshop not far from their home, offering beginner courses specifically designed for complete newcomers, many of them, like Robert, exploring the craft later in life after retiring from unrelated careers. On his very first day of official retirement, rather than simply relaxing at home as he had vaguely imagined during his final working years, Robert drove to the community workshop, nervously signing up for their upcoming 8-week beginner course. The workshop itself immediately captivated Robert's attention, various woodworking machines humming quietly throughout the space, shelves stacked with different types of lumber, the pleasant smell of fresh sawdust filling the air. Finished projects from previous students lined one wall, small side tables, jewelry boxes, simple bookshelves, each labeled with the maker's name and completion date, evidence of countless other beginners who had once stood exactly where Robert now stood, uncertain and slightly intimidated. An older man with weathered, capable hands approached him warmly. "You must be here for the beginner course," the man said, extending his hand. "I'm Walt. I've been running this program for almost 15 years now." "Robert," he replied, shaking Walt's hand firmly. "I'm definitely a complete beginner." "I hope that's not a problem." "Everyone starts exactly where you are," Walt reassured him, smiling. "Most people who come through that door have never touched a woodworking tool in their entire lives. That's exactly why we're here." Walt gave him a brief tour of the workshop before the first official class began, pointing out the various machines Robert would eventually learn to use safely: table saws, planers, sanders, each currently intimidating and unfamiliar, though Walt promised they would become second nature with sufficient practice and proper instruction. The following Monday evening marked Robert's first official class. 7 other students had also enrolled, mostly retirees like himself, along with 2 younger students seeking a practical hobby completely different from their office-based careers. A retired police officer named George mentioned he wanted something to occupy his restless hands after decades of active duty work. A young graphic designer named Maya, one of the 2 younger students, explained she wanted to build her own furniture rather than continuing to purchase mass-produced pieces she found increasingly unsatisfying. Walt began the course with fundamental safety procedures, patiently explaining the proper use of various tools before allowing anyone near the actual machinery. Woodworking rewards patience and punishes carelessness, Walt told the nervous group during that first session. We'll move slowly at first, but trust me, safety habits developed now will serve you for years to come. During the first few weeks, Robert learned foundational skills, measuring accurately, selecting appropriate wood for different projects, and properly using basic hand tools before eventually progressing toward power tools under Walt's careful supervision. His first practice project, a simple wooden box, proved considerably more challenging than Robert initially anticipated. The box required precise corner joints, small interlocking pieces of wood that needed to fit together perfectly without any visible gaps. Robert's first attempt produced joints so poorly fitted that light shone clearly through several visible cracks, forcing him to disassemble the entire piece and begin again from scratch. His second attempt fared only marginally better, one corner fitting reasonably well while the opposite corner remained stubbornly uneven no matter how many times he carefully resanded the offending edge. I thought this would be straightforward, Robert admitted during the third class, examining his crooked, poorly fitting box joints with obvious frustration. Apparently I was wrong. Precision takes practice, Walt reassured him, examining the imperfect joints without judgment. Your hands need time to develop the necessary muscle memory. Nobody creates perfect joints during their first attempts, myself included, many years ago. Despite his early struggles, Robert found himself genuinely enjoying the methodical, focused nature of woodworking, quite different from the abstract, numbers-based work that had defined his professional career for over 3 decades. He appreciated the tangible, physical satisfaction of watching raw materials gradually transform into something genuinely useful through his own patient effort. During the 4th class, Robert became friendly with another student named Dorothy, a retired nurse who had decided to pursue woodworking after her own retirement, initially hoping to build simple furniture for her grandchildren. I want to build them a proper wooden toy chest, Dorothy explained during a break, examining her own practice project with determined focus. Something they'll actually keep and remember, rather than more plastic toys that break within months. Dorothy and Robert quickly discovered they shared similar reasons for pursuing this new hobby, both feeling a quiet sense of unfinished business regarding creative pursuits set aside during their working years. They began practicing together during open workshop hours on weekends, comparing techniques, sharing frustrations over particularly stubborn joints, and generally encouraging each other through the inevitable early struggles every beginner experienced. I keep thinking about my grandmother's old sewing machine, Dorothy admitted one Saturday afternoon, carefully measuring a piece of pine for her toy chest project. She always said working with your hands teaches you patience nothing else can. I think I finally understand what she meant. Robert admired Dorothy's clear motivation, realizing he hadn't yet considered exactly what he ultimately hoped to build with his developing skills. This reflection led him to an important realization: his daughter Sarah was getting married the following year, and Robert began imagining the possibility of building something meaningful for her wedding, perhaps a proper dining table for her new home, rather than simply purchasing something from a furniture store. Encouraged by this emerging goal, Robert approached his remaining weeks in the beginner course with renewed determination, practicing diligently between sessions in a small section of his garage he had converted into a temporary practice space, purchasing basic tools gradually as his confidence and skill developed. Linda, noticing her husband's growing enthusiasm, encouraged him to properly outfit a corner of their garage as a genuine workspace, helping him research and select essential tools within a reasonable budget. Together, they cleared out old boxes and unused sports equipment that had accumulated in the garage for years, creating enough room for a proper workbench and adequate storage for lumber and supplies. By the 6th week, Robert successfully completed his wooden box project, considerably improved from his earlier attempts, the joints fitting together snugly and evenly. Walt examined the finished piece with genuine approval. "This is excellent progress," Walt told him. "You've clearly been practicing beyond just our scheduled sessions." "I have," Robert admitted. "I've actually been thinking about building something bigger, eventually. A dining table, for my daughter's wedding next year." Walt's expression brightened considerably at this ambition. "That's a wonderful goal," he said. "Ambitious for someone still relatively early in their woodworking journey, but definitely achievable with proper planning and continued practice. I'd be happy to mentor you specifically toward that project, if you're genuinely committed. Robert accepted this offer enthusiastically, and after completing the standard beginner course, he began attending additional private sessions with Walt, specifically focused on the skills necessary for constructing quality furniture, joinery techniques considerably more advanced than anything covered during the introductory classes. Their early private sessions focused heavily on design planning before Robert touched any actual lumber. Walt insisted on proper technical drawings, precise measurements accounting for wood movement over time, and careful consideration of structural requirements necessary to support a table intended for decades of family use. Robert found this planning phase surprisingly enjoyable, reminding him pleasantly of certain analytical aspects of his accounting career, though applied now towards something considerably more personal and tangible. "A table like this needs to outlive us both," Walt told him during one planning session, reviewing Robert's careful sketches. "Build it properly from the beginning, and your grandchildren's grandchildren could still be eating dinner on this exact table." This perspective deeply moved Robert, reinforcing his determination to approach every subsequent step with the patience and precision the project genuinely deserved. Over the following months, Robert dedicated himself seriously to this ambitious project, spending nearly every weekend and several weekday evenings practicing increasingly complex techniques, proper wood selection for structural furniture, advanced joinery methods capable of supporting significant weight, and careful finishing techniques that would protect the table for decades of family use. However, Robert's journey toward completing this meaningful project wasn't without significant challenges. During his third month of dedicated practice, attempting his first serious attempt at the actual tabletop using expensive, carefully selected hardwood, Robert made a critical measurement error, cutting one of the main boards noticeably shorter than required. He had spent nearly an entire month's woodworking budget selecting this particular hardwood, a rich, warm-toned walnut he had specifically chosen because it reminded him of his father's own favorite material. Standing in his garage that evening, staring at the miscut board under harsh workshop lighting, Robert felt a wave of genuine disappointment wash over him, considerably heavier than the frustration he had experienced during earlier, smaller mistakes. "I've ruined it," Robert said, staring at the miscut board with genuine dismay, calculating mentally the cost of the ruined, expensive lumber. Weeks of careful planning, completely wasted because of one careless mistake. Walt examined the situation calmly before responding. "It's certainly frustrating, but not nearly as catastrophic as it feels right now," he said. "This particular mistake is actually incredibly common, even among experienced woodworkers. We can adjust the design slightly to accommodate the shorter board, or source an additional matching piece. Either way, this project isn't ruined, just temporarily complicated." This reassurance helped Robert regain his composure, though the mistake cost him both additional expense and considerable additional time, sourcing matching replacement lumber and adjusting his careful measurements accordingly. Despite this setback, Robert pressed forward determinedly, motivated by his daughter's approaching wedding date and his genuine desire to create something lasting and meaningful for her new home. Around the 5th month, Robert faced an entirely different kind of challenge. His wife Linda, initially supportive of his new hobby, began expressing gentle concern about the considerable time Robert now dedicated to his workshop project, often spending entire weekends in his garage rather than joining her for previously regular activities together. Their Sunday morning walks, a cherished routine throughout most of their 30-year marriage, had quietly disappeared from their schedule over recent months. Their occasional weekend trips to visit friends had similarly been postponed repeatedly, Robert always citing some pressing deadline related to his self-imposed wedding timeline. Linda mentioned this pattern carefully one evening, choosing her words thoughtfully rather than expressing outright frustration. "I'm genuinely happy you found something you love," Linda told him one evening, her tone measured but clearly concerned. "But I miss spending time together. It feels like I've lost you to that garage completely." Robert felt genuinely surprised hearing this, having been so thoroughly absorbed in his ambitious project that he hadn't fully registered how significantly his priorities had shifted over recent months. This conversation prompted Robert to seriously reconsider his approach, recognizing the validity of Linda's concern despite his genuine enthusiasm for the meaningful project. He discussed the situation with Walt during their next session, seeking advice about balancing his ambitious woodworking goals with important relationships outside the workshop. "This is honestly one of the most important lessons in any serious hobby," Walt told him thoughtfully. "Passion projects can easily consume every available hour if we're not careful, sometimes at genuine cost to the people who matter most. Consider setting specific, limited hours for your workshop time, protecting the remaining time deliberately for your marriage and other important relationships." Taking this advice seriously, Robert restructured his schedule considerably, establishing clear boundaries around his workshop time while ensuring he maintained regular quality time with Linda, occasionally even inviting her to observe his progress, gradually helping her understand and appreciate the meaningful significance behind his dedicated effort. He reinstated their Sunday morning walks immediately, treating this time as equally non-negotiable as his workshop sessions had become. He also began inviting Linda into the garage occasionally during evenings, not necessarily to work herself, but simply to sit nearby with a book or a cup of tea while he worked, restoring some sense of shared time even during his practice sessions. Linda mentioned she genuinely enjoyed these quiet evenings together, watching her husband's careful concentration, occasionally offering opinions on design details he sometimes struggled to decide alone. "I had no idea how much skill this actually requires," Linda admitted several weeks later, watching Robert carefully sand a table leg with practiced, patient strokes. "This isn't just a hobby anymore, is it? This has become something you're genuinely passionate about." "It really has," Robert agreed. "Though you're right that I needed better balance. Thank you for telling me honestly, rather than just quietly resenting it." With improved balance restored between his workshop dedication and his marriage, Robert continued making steady progress throughout the following months. By the 8th month, the table's individual components were finally complete: sturdy, carefully joined legs, a solid supporting frame, and the smooth, evenly finished tabletop that had caused him such difficulty months earlier. The final assembly process required an entire dedicated weekend, Walt personally visiting Robert's garage workshop to supervise this crucial final stage, ensuring every joint fit properly and the entire structure remained perfectly level and stable. Dorothy stopped by briefly on the Sunday afternoon as well, having completed her own toy chest project weeks earlier, genuinely curious to see how Robert's much more ambitious project had turned out. "Robert, this is stunning," Dorothy said, running her hand along the smooth, warm-toned walnut surface. "I remember when you were nearly in despair over that miscut board. Look at it now. This is genuinely impressive work for someone at your experience level," Walt told him, examining the fully assembled table with obvious professional satisfaction. "You should be extremely proud of what you've accomplished here." Robert stood back, studying the finished table thoughtfully, remembering clearly his uncertain first attempts at simple wooden boxes many months earlier, his early mistakes, his wife's honest concerns, and his own persistent determination throughout numerous challenging setbacks along the way. "I honestly can't believe I actually finished it," Robert admitted, genuine emotion evident in his voice. "This has been the most meaningful thing I've accomplished since retiring, maybe in years, honestly." With his daughter's wedding rapidly approaching, Robert carefully applied several coats of protective finish to the completed table, allowing adequate drying time between each careful application, determined that this meaningful gift would properly withstand decades of family meals, celebrations, and everyday use within his daughter's new home. The wedding day itself arrived with considerable excitement throughout the entire family. Robert had arranged for the finished table to be delivered directly to Sarah's new house the week beforehand, wanting her genuine reaction upon discovering it, rather than simply presenting it publicly during the wedding celebration itself. Sarah called her father immediately upon seeing the table for the first time, her voice trembling with genuine emotion. "Dad, this is absolutely beautiful," she said. "I can't believe you actually built this yourself. This means more to me than you could possibly imagine. I wanted you to have something that would last, something meaningful," Robert explained, feeling his own eyes unexpectedly filling with tears. "Something you'll hopefully pass down to your own children someday." Sarah paused for a moment on the phone before adding quietly, I keep thinking about how many family dinners we'll have around this table over the years. Birthdays, holidays, ordinary Tuesday evenings. You built something that's going to hold all of that. During the wedding reception itself, held at Sarah's new home specifically to showcase the newly finished dining room, numerous family members and friends admired the beautiful table, several asking Robert detailed questions about his surprising new woodworking hobby, genuinely impressed by his accomplished craftsmanship. "I had no idea you could build something like this," Robert's brother-in-law admitted, running his hand appreciatively along the smooth, carefully finished surface. "This looks like something from an expensive furniture showroom, not something built in a garage workshop." "I had excellent teaching," Robert said modestly, thinking gratefully of Walt's patient mentorship throughout the entire challenging, rewarding process. Later that evening, once most guests had departed and only close family remained, Sarah pulled her father aside quietly. "Dad, I know this took you almost a year," she said, her eyes glistening slightly. "Mom told me about the difficult moments, the mistake with the wood, everything. I want you to know exactly how much this means, not just the table itself, but everything you put into making it." Robert felt his own eyes filling with emotion again, embracing his daughter warmly. "You're worth every difficult moment," he told her honestly. "I only wish your grandfather could have seen it too. I think he would have been proud." In the months following the wedding, Robert continued developing his woodworking skills, taking on increasingly ambitious projects, a matching set of chairs for Sarah's new dining table, a bookshelf for his own home office, and eventually, a small wooden rocking horse for his first grandchild, born the following year. Building the rocking horse proved to be an entirely different kind of challenge, requiring curved cuts and careful shaping that Robert hadn't previously attempted. He spent considerable time researching traditional rocking horse designs, eventually creating something simple but sturdy, painted carefully by Linda, who had increasingly taken an interest in the finishing and decorative aspects of Robert's various projects. "Maybe I should take a painting class," Linda suggested one evening, examining her careful work on the rocking horse's painted mane. "If you can learn something entirely new at 58, surely I can pick up a paintbrush again." Robert also began assisting Walt occasionally during beginner classes, sharing his own relatively recent experience as someone who discovered this fulfilling craft considerably later in life, offering particular encouragement to other retirees uncertain whether they could genuinely master an entirely new skill at their age. "I felt exactly like you're feeling right now," Robert often told nervous new students, remembering clearly his own uncertain first evening in Walt's workshop. "Convinced I was probably too old, too inexperienced, too impatient for something this precise. But patience genuinely develops with consistent practice, regardless of your age when you actually begin." One particular student, a recently retired schoolteacher named Harold, reminded Robert vividly of his own early hesitation. Harold had spent his first several sessions apologizing repeatedly for his slow progress, convinced everyone else in the class was somehow naturally more capable than him. "You're being far too hard on yourself," Robert told Harold one evening, examining his admittedly wobbly practice joint with patient understanding. "I made that exact same mistake for my first 2 months. Nobody arrives here already skilled. That's rather the entire point of a beginner class." Harold seemed genuinely comforted hearing this from someone clearly further along in the same journey, and Robert felt a quiet satisfaction offering the same patient reassurance Walt had once extended to him. Reflecting occasionally on his remarkable journey, Robert often thought back to that pivotal conversation with Linda before his retirement, when he first admitted his long-held, quietly abandoned dream of learning proper woodworking. He thought, too, of his father's own workshop from decades earlier, wishing he could somehow show him the finished table, the careful joinery, the smooth walnut surface that had cost him so much frustration and eventual pride. He felt genuinely grateful he had finally pursued this meaningful goal, rather than allowing retirement to pass by filled only with vague regret about paths never taken. "Best decision I ever made in retirement," Robert often told friends and family, gesturing toward whatever current project occupied his garage workshop. "Well, second best, right after finally listening properly to my wife." Linda, overhearing this particular comment during a family dinner one evening, simply smiled knowingly, genuinely pleased watching her husband thrive in this unexpected, deeply fulfilling new chapter of his life. And that's the end of today's story, The Workshop. I really love this story because it shows something meaningful. It's genuinely never too late to pursue something you've always secretly wanted to try, even decades after you initially imagined it. Before you go, think about this: is there a skill or hobby you've always wanted to learn, but assumed you'd started too late for? Maybe, like Robert, now could be exactly the right time to begin. Thank you so much for listening today. This has been Anna, and this is the podcast. See you in the next episode. Take care, and keep practicing your English.